Um, I'm going to give a very brief discussion of some of the problems with Korea, which are now quite central in U.S. national security. And then I want to go over the simulation, which we're going to do next week, which is on B courses. And then I think you'll have some time after that to break up into groups and get some preliminary work done about the simulation. Okay, so this is divided into 4 parts. Just some historical perspectives in case you're not too familiar with it. I'm going to go fairly quickly here. Chinese originally migrated to Korea many centuries ago. Korea is a peninsula off East Asian mainland. It's largely barren. It has almost no natural resources, and it's been a historically poor country for centuries. The Chinese who lived on the Korean peninsula were thought of as lesser than the Chinese on the mainland. So there's always been a bit of a sort of ethnic or cultural disparaging of those in Korea. Moving toward closer to modern times, the Japanese, after they became expansionist, occupied Korea from 1910 to 1945, 35 years. It was a very brutal occupation. Did I mention the story? I think I mentioned the story about the church and all that, so you've heard it. So, but very brutal. And even though, of course, most Koreans today were not born during the occupation, they know about it from their parents and grandparents. And there's a lot of antipathy still today between Korea and Japan, even though trade relations are excellent. Economic relations are excellent. I think, as you know, in Russian textbooks, it says, there was the Hiroshima bomb was August 6, 1945. It's not often mentioned in Russian textbooks. On August 8th, there was Russian declaration of war against Japan. On August 9th, there was Nagasaki, often not mentioned in Russian textbooks. And then around August 15th, Japan surrendered. So the Russian textbook says we declared war on August 8th. They surrendered on August 15th. Now, once Soviet Union declared war on Japan in 1945, they surged Soviet forces south into northern Korea. Remember, there's about a 15 or 20 kilometer border between what's today Russia and North Korea. They stopped because there were U.S. forces heading up the southern part of the Korean peninsula, and it became a de facto dividing line at the 38th parallel between North and South Korea. Stalin, in charge of the Soviet Union, assigned a young Korean communist named Kim Il-sung to go to Korea to be the head of North Korea. That was in 1946. He was the head of Korea until he died in 1994. That's 48 years. In academia, we call that tenure. During that time, they built up their military. At a key moment very early in the Cold War, Dean Acheson, who was the U.S. Secretary of State at the time, declared that in the emerging Cold War with the Soviet Union, Korea was outside the defense perimeter of the United States. It was not an area we were going to protect. That was January 1950. June 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea, probably with the acquiescence of both Stalin and Mao. Remember, the Chinese had been victorious in the Chinese Revolution of 1949. So it was just a few months after the Chinese Revolution that Kim Il-sung invaded. Then, contrary to Dean Acheson's remarks, Truman felt that the U.S. had to intervene to protect South Korea against the communist victory in the South. So he went to the United Nations, and then in this peculiar moment, Wyszynski, who was the Soviet ambassador to the UN, was out of the room at the time of the key vote. Therefore, Russia did not exercise a veto. The UN has Security Council members have vetoes. So Russia did not veto. They were counted as having abstained, and the other 4 members voted in support of a UN action against North Korea. So that legitimized U.S. involvement. U.S. was involved, so was Australia and some other countries. It was a very brutal war, 3 years, June 1950 to June 1953. At one key moment, MacArthur, who was the head of U.S. forces, great hero from World War II, moved U.S. forces toward the Yalu River near the Chinese border, and the Chinese intervened. The only time that U.S. and Chinese forces have fought each other since the communists came to power in 1949. Many fatalities on both sides. Brutal war, cold in winter, very hot in summer. It led to the status quo ante, basically the return of North Korean forces above the 38th parallel, and just to basically a return to what had happened before the involvement of North Korean forces. This ultimately led to the division of the 2 states, a formal division of the 2 states, Democratic Republic of North Korea, DPRK, and the Republic of Korea, South Korea. South Korea took a long time, but became a democracy by the late 70s, early 80s. It had been a very poor country into the 70s, but then under President Park Chung-hee, became very successful in a capitalist system, became very wealthy. It's one of the wealthiest countries in the world today. After the Korean War ended, the U.S. and South Korea signed a security treaty, which stipulates that the U.S. will come to the aid of South Korea if they are attacked. It's not reciprocal. South Korea does not have to come to the aid if the U.S. is attacked. It's just the U.S. comes to the aid of South Korea's attack. And the U.S. has stationed forces in South Korea ever since, and during the Cold War, placed many nuclear weapons, U.S.-controlled nuclear weapons, on South Korean territory. In maybe going back at least to the 60s, maybe earlier, with Soviet and Chinese help, the North Koreans began to develop their own nuclear program. South Korea had its own flirtation in the 70s after the U.S. withdrew from Vietnam, but the U.S. threatened to withdraw from the security treaty if they proceeded, so that the South Koreans stopped their program. Also, Wei Khan, the Pakistani, who was very essential to the Pakistani program and who became a nuclear entrepreneur, provided nuclear materials, blueprints, technology, and advice to North Korea, also to Iran and to Libya. With the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russian influence ended for quite a while, but the Chinese began to increase their influence. In 94, there was a critical point. There had been this Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989, June 89. There was a democracy demonstration in Tiananmen Square. It's the largest square in the world in central Beijing. Mostly students from Peking University and Tsinghua, but some other people as well. And the Chinese went in and crushed the rebellion. Several hundred people were detained or killed. A lot of their whereabouts were never made clear. Because of that, and that was one of the first major events televised on CNN, which had gotten up and going in the 80s, the U.S. quasi-suspended relations with China. In 1994, 5 years later, Clinton was president, and he thought it was time to try to renormalize things, and he asked Secretary of Defense Perry to go to China to meet with the Chinese leadership to discuss a variety of issues, one of which was the North Korean nuclear program. I happened to be a member of that team that went with Perry. And the key meeting, Perry said to Jiang Zemin, who was the Chinese president, and Li Peng, who was so-called the butcher of Tiananmen Square, that relations with North Korea, negotiations with North Korea, which were going on in Geneva at that time, were not going well. And if they continued at that pace, there could be war in the Korean Peninsula. That's what he said, there could be war. The Chinese response was sort of like, we never heard of North Korea, we didn't know how to spell it. It was a rebuff of the Perry gesture seeking Chinese assistance. It's a little bit like what's going on now with Trump and Xi Jinping, getting the Chinese to influence the North Koreans. However, 72 hours later, this is the pre-email era, 72 hours later, the U.S. group with Perry was in Shanghai for other meetings, and we got a cable from Washington, that Washington had just gotten a cable from Geneva, that suddenly the North Koreans had changed their negotiating position. And therefore, an agreement with the North was now possible. So the lesson possibly learned from this is the Chinese will not directly, in the face of a threat or demand, acquiesce. They might change their position if they think it's in their interest, but they'll decouple it to save face from any bowing to U.S. pressure. There was an agreement reached, so-called the Agreed Framework of 1994, that was considered the breakthrough agreement, and we thought it stopped their reprocessing capability, and they didn't have an enrichment facility that we thought of at that time. It turned out they did have an enrichment facility, which was kept secret and underground, and they were producing more fissile material. Later on, so there you have the Agreed Framework, reprocessing limit, hidden enrichment capability. This is now under the success. Oh, I forgot to tell you that in '94 also, just as this was happening, former President Jimmy Carter, Southern Democratic governor, no friend of Southern Democratic Governor Bill Clinton, told Clinton he himself was going to go to North Korea and solve the problem. Clinton was not interested in having Carter go to North Korea to solve the problem. But ultimately, he acquiesced. Carter went to North Korea, and he cabled back and he said, I think we've made progress, and I think there can be an agreement at Geneva. So he took some credit for this. When Carter flew home from Pyongyang, right afterwards, Kim Il-sung dropped dead. Now, he had a big heart attack. So people in the Clinton administration, I was in the Clinton administration, people said, we should send him to the Middle East, we should send him. Tremendous weapon there. So it remained an issue. Clinton sort of finessed it, but Carter takes credit for making progress on the Agreed Framework. After Kim Il-sung died, he was replaced by his groomed successor. And so these guys had multiple wives with multiple children, so it's hard to keep track. But one of his children was Kim Jong-il, and he had been groomed to replace Kim Il-sung. He became the new president of Korea in 1994, and he lasted until 2011. During that time, North Korea ramped up its program. It got new missile technology from Pakistan, and also possibly from China, and possibly from Russia. And there were quite a number of incendiary actions that they took. They shot down a South Korean aircraft. They shelled an island, and it was very inflammatory. But at one point, the South Koreans actually elected Kim Dae Jung, who was a liberal president of South Korea, who actually reached out to North Korea, developed a so-called sunshine policy. This led to an economic zone where they could trade. It led to South Korean families going to the north to visit their relatives who they hadn't seen in 50 years. But ultimately, Kim Dae Jung and sunshine policy disappeared. A number of North Korean provocations and attacks followed. By all accounts, as news came out about North Korea, it's a very repressive state, it's a Stalinist state, and only increased after Kim Jong-il died in 2011. when his son, who had not been groomed to replace him, was suddenly selected, a Swiss-educated son, who originally Americans thought would be maybe much more open to negotiation, Kim Jong-un. He was appointed in his 20s. He's now in his early 30s. He's been there 5 years. He's been exceedingly repressive. At least 70 or 80 of his top generals and political leaders have been executed. Many very ghastly, a number with artillery shells shot into them. There was one rumor that proved incorrect, that a bunch of starving dogs were sent into a stadium to eat his uncle alive. It's really quite gruesome stuff. And he's gone on a series of nuclear weapons tests and missile development programs, culminating now in the movement toward, but not yet deployed, an ICBM with a nuclear warhead that could reach the United States. That's what has precipitated the current crisis. So under number 2J, Kim Jong-un in power since 2011, repressive, executions increase, all the executions of top officials, poisoning of his half-brother, that just happened within the last several weeks. His half-brother, who was not really seen as any possible threat, he's been a playboy living in Macau and elsewhere, working in casinos and spent time in Disneyland. But he was recently poisoned, and they've arrested North Koreans for this poison. This made international news just in the last few weeks. So he's very erratic. He has the advantage, the benefit of being seen as unstable. Maybe we're beginning to match him now on the other side. Where are we with what we think they have? We actually don't know how many nuclear weapons they have. 10, 20, 50 nuclear weapons, unclear. Their weapons are hidden, they're deeply buried underground, and they're mobile. It's a very dark country. It's very hard to get intelligence. Human intelligence is very slim. Satellite intelligence is limited. Reconnaissance, cyber, and electronic surveillance is very limited. So there's deep uncertainties about what their capability is. Very deep underground mobile transporters. Both the short range, medium range, intermediate range, and potentially intercontinental range missiles, potential threat to the U.S. The U.S. situation, I'll get to you in 1 second. The U.S. situation is we have, I know you know the basic scene here. There's a Korean peninsula. There's the DMZ. South Koreans have, it's estimated, at least 10,000 artillery shells right on the edge of the demilitarized zone. And here's Seoul, 35 miles away, which has half the population and half the GDP of Korea. There are 28,000 U.S. troops over here. Japan is also within easy striking distance of their IRBMs. And the U.S. has another 30,000 troops there, naval bases, air bases. Pyongyang is here. It's thought most of the North Korean nuclear weapons are stationed up here near the Chinese border, but there's a lot of uncertainty. And they may be moving around. So what's currently going on? The vulnerability of the U.S. troops. U.S. troops are on a hair trigger alert. Their motto is "Fight tonight." Fight tonight. They have to be ready to fight at a moment's notice. DMZ with more than 1 million North Korean troops just to the north of the demilitarized zone. The demilitarized zone is a few miles wide. Have any of you haven't been there? I've been there. Demilitarized zone, and in the demilitarized zone there's a building, and in that building there were South-North negotiations. When I was taken there the first time in the 1980s, I was taken there by a Korean official, South Korean official, and he told me the following story. He said when the North Korean head of delegation came in, he was a 3-star Army general, he had two first comments or questions. The first was there were leather chairs around the conference table. And he pointed to them and he said to the South Korean, from what foreign country did you get those chairs? He couldn't accept that the South Koreans could manufacture such attractive furniture because there's nothing like that in the world. Secondly, he looked at the ceiling. It's very hot in summer, high 90s, very humid. There's air conditioning ducts. He said, what are those listening devices? He didn't know the concept of air conditioning. This was in the early 80s. Now, a lot's happened since. They're much more sophisticated now, but you can't underestimate how limited their knowledge might be on different subjects, depending upon what their background is. It was in the demilitarized zone that an American was axed to death, A-X-E-D, axed to death by a North Korean soldier in 1976. In the course of the Cold War, I happened to be in some interesting places, not just Shattuck Avenue, but also Checkpoint Charlie between East and West Berlin, on the Metula, on the Israeli-Lebanese border, some other places. I've never been in a more tense place in the world than the demilitarized zone of the Korean Peninsula. You feel like that any second, all hell could break loose. And for people who've been there recently, no change. Now it's been quiet, more or less, from June 53 till tonight. How much longer will it be quiet? Another 50 years? Another 50 minutes? Not clear. The artillery capable of destroying Seoul, potentially destroying Tokyo. Extended deterrence U.S. policy of maintaining credibility of our guarantees to reassure the South Koreans and the Japanese, to preclude proliferation, which is your project problem. Is it believable? Do the Japanese and South Koreans believe today that the U.S. would sacrifice maybe part of the west coast of the United States to save them? Could there be a potential conflict against the Chinese in a Korean crisis? Would the Chinese be willing and able to really have influence over North Korea? And what's the role of missile defense? You know, we put in a THAAD system, Theater High Altitude Area Defense System, which the Chinese deeply object to because they think it's a precursor to a system that could intervene with their own retaliatory capability. The South Koreans have not been too enthusiastic about this system, but they've accepted because of the tensions with the North. So these are all some of the core issues. And most recently, I don't want to get into a sort of current eventsy thing, except that it's a top priority now. Just in the last week, there have been exceptional inflammatory statements by the Trump administration, uniquely inflammatory. The era of strategic patience is over. McMaster said over the weekend, National Security Advisor said over the weekend, we are reaching a tipping point, a final stage in this conflict. Trump has said we want the Chinese to help us with this. If they can't do it, we'll do it ourselves. No American president has ever said this. Now maybe it's chit-chat, and maybe it isn't. Evidently, the North Korean ambassador to the United Nations said today, we are moving toward nuclear war. He said that today in the United Nations. Today. So this is a non-trivial matter. Now, if you want to have a nice sinister explanation, it's a big wag the dog story. You know, wag the dog? Mm-hmm. So you start a war to deflect from domestic problems. but maybe it isn't. And it won't matter to those who are victims of a nuclear attack. They won't care. So that's some material on the Korean situation I thought you might. Now, you had a question.
Yeah, I was wondering when you were talking about surveillance being challenging, whether it's more challenging for some reason over North Korea, or just generally that satellite surveillance is a difficult nut to crack?
It's more challenging over North Korea because they have, they've got very few systems on electric power grids. They have their own generators. You know, you probably have seen photos of North Korea. It's dark. You know, South Korea at night looks like Times Square in Manhattan, and North Korea looks like the Amazon jungle. It's just dark. They're not on computer networks that we can easily access, and they're very smart. They're very cagey. They may know even when our satellites are coming over and when to move things around. So it's a very demanding intelligence challenge for the U.S. And we have support. We've got South Korean intelligence. They may have some very good intelligence. There might be some other countries that have intelligence. But I would just say the bandwidth of uncertainty around what we know about North Korea is probably as high as it is among any country in the world. Yes?
What's Russia's current position in North Korea?
So Russia evidently just made some statement today saying that the U.S. has been very aggressive and that we should cut out any actions, suggest any unilateral actions. So they're critical. And of course, you know, the relations at the moment between the U.S. and Russia are very poor. So you wouldn't expect the Russians to support the United States. So, yeah.
What are the consequences of North Korean regime collapse?
Right, so could the North Korean regime collapse? What would be the consequence? Again, we don't know. I mean, it wouldn't take anything more than some general to put a bullet in Kim Jong-un's head to change the leadership. But does that change the regime? Who knows? And what would the regime then, what would the new leader want to do? And a core question, so that's all speculative, a core question is, what's the disposition of the nuclear weapons in the event there's a regime change? Is that something that stays with the North Koreans? Did the Chinese try to grab that stuff? Did the Americans try to do anything with it? There is a U.S.-South Korean defense plan that calls for a division of labor. By the way, the North Koreans, just to make life exciting, also have substantial biological and chemical weapon stocks. And nobody knows how much of that is deployed and could be used by missiles to attack the South or Japan or elsewhere. Another dimension of that question is, could the U.S. actually achieve a strike which takes out the leadership? Very hard. This man moves around a lot. He's in deeply buried facilities. They have doubles to make sure that it's confusing who is Kim Jong-un and who isn't Kim Jong-un. You know, they want him to survive. He wants to survive. So he's doing everything he can to make sure he survives. He's not just going to try to make it easy. So very, very hard. Decapitation is the term that's used. A decapitation strike. Kill the leadership, end the problem. On the other hand, kill the leadership, maybe not end the problem. Maybe he's delegated authority to his generals. If I'm dead, shoot them. Shoot the missiles. It's alleged that Kim Jong-il told Kim Jong-un that if you think the North Korean regime is going down, take everyone with you that you can. Kill as many people as you can. And maybe this is baloney, maybe it isn't, but do you want to risk it? So the big problem for the United States, and I can tell you in 1994, at the time of that Perry meeting and afterward, Bill Clinton met with the Joint Chiefs and went over the war plans to attack North Korea. And he asked a question like JFK asked during the missile crisis. Can you guarantee me if we attack that they won't have enough retaliation to do great damage? In the Cuban Missile Crisis, the answer was, no, we can't guarantee it. So Kennedy said, okay, let's forget about the preemptive strike, let's talk about other things. When Bill Clinton was there, he asked the same question. And they said, no, we can't guarantee it. There'll be tremendous damage or so. So Bill Clinton said, okay, let's forget about the preemptive strike, let's talk about other things. What's happening tonight? I don't know. But I would think the answer is roughly the same. Unless there's a new magical krypton weapon, we have some cyber system that can immobilize them. I mean, you saw that it was alleged that this missile fire failure was because of U.S. cyber interference. I don't know. Yeah.
So when Kim Jong-un's half-brother was assassinated recently,
right,
and when we detected the sort of chemical weapon misuse, did that bump up our assessment of their chemical weapons capabilities, just based on the fact that it was the most advanced type of chemical weapon?
No, there's been an assessment of the chemical and biological stocks for a long time. Again, there's a bandwidth of uncertainty, but we know they've had both for a long time. And it's all operationalized. They don't have any qualms, at least their military doctrine of using this stuff. It's all part of a continuum. Now, maybe all of this is to be an active deterrent against the United States, right? Maybe it's one big credible threat to deter the U.S., but maybe not. It's a cheery subject, isn't it?
So I by no means have any expertise in military strategy, but all the reports I hear is that, putting aside the issue of the nukes now and how they are delivered and so forth, a conventional war between the joint forces of Korea and the North would be very short and very unfavorable to North Korea. Literally, they talk about a matter of days and it'll be over. Is that what you hear?
Well, there has been an evolution, and for a long time it was thought that North Korea's conventional forces were superior to the South's. But over time, the South has bolstered them tremendously, and the North has all these economic problems. So going back to the latter part of the Kim Jong-il regime into the Kim Jong-un regime, they appear to have shifted their resources primarily to nuclear weapons modernization. And they have not done what is needed for conventional force modernization. So on a purely conventional to conventional battlefield, North Korea doesn't look so favorably, which only drives them to the nuclear option. So I don't know if one finds solace in that or not. It strikes me that the more the North Koreans game out that a conventional war would be to their detriment, the more they're going to resort to nuclear weapon use. Yeah.
With the U.S. taking more aggressive courses of action, would you say that North Korea is kind of running out of moves?
I don't know who's running out of moves first. I don't know. I mean, the North Koreans, part of it is unmeasurable, which is how stable is the North Korean regime. So far, Kim Jong-un has just used terror to sustain his rule. Now, there have been defectors. There's an increasing flow of defectors, which is an interesting sign. Most recently, the highest-ranking defector ever, who was the DCM, second in command of the Korean embassy in London, defected. He's the highest-ranking official ever to defect from North Korea. And he claimed that this can't go on indefinitely, that there's so much terror, pure terror, even among the leadership, that Kim Jong-un could kill anybody at any moment, that someone eventually will take him out. It's just an intolerable situation. But you don't know if that's going to happen tonight or it's going to happen in 25 years. So if he feels he's stable, and if he is stable, as long as he's not stricken As long as he's not attacked, he can continue with this kind of inflammatory policy. But he does need to, he'll have to worry about, China represents something like 80% of their food supplies. They're the biggest importer of goods from North Korea, the biggest exporter of goods to North Korea. If China were really to cut down on this stuff, how serious would the North Korean economy be hurt? How long could they last? Even though you may have read just some of the missile tests, the Americans recovered parts from the missiles that went into the sea. They had Chinese markings on them. Chinese were supplying stuff, even on the most recent missile tests. So, maybe this kind of very inflammatory Trump rhetoric will finally push the Chinese to really try and squelch this. Because from a Chinese perspective, you have to realize, from a Chinese perspective, probably the best situation is the current situation. You've got a North Korea, it's got nuclear weapons, it's pretty much inviolate to attack. Korea's divided. China has hugely positive economic relations with South Korea, Japan, and with North Korea. The U.S. has a big role, but it's not going anywhere. It's not growing. Right? What are some alternatives? An alternative could be a unified Korea with nuclear weapons allied with the United States. That's not in China's interest. A unified Korea without nuclear weapons allied with the United States. That's not in Chinese interest. Why should they try to modify the current situation? So one would think, unless they come to the conclusion, unless Xi Jinping in the real world, when he meets just with his Politburo and his generals, we can't trust that guy anymore. He's going to lead this thing to nuclear war. It's estimated there could be, if war begins in the Korean Peninsula, the Chinese estimate 10 million North Koreans will flee into China. They don't want that. They have enough people. They got 1.2 billion people. They don't need 10 million new Koreans. So a lot of it at the moment, basically the Americans have put the ball to some degree in the Chinese court. And the Chinese are now assessing what is it in their national interest to do. And I don't know what the answer is. The answer may be, let them shoot it out.
Considering how seriously we take nuclear weapons, I felt like there was a limited news coverage of the largest conventional weapon, supposedly.
Yeah, the MOAB.
Yeah.
Massive ordnance weapon.
Does that have any kind of impact on?
Yeah, you have to decide whether both the chemical weapons attacked by the Tomahawks in Syria and the MOAB in Afghanistan were basically statements to the North Koreans. I don't know. That's one plausible suggestion. Trump is basically talking to Pyongyang. Saying, we're not kidding around. This is a different ballgame. It's a different group of guys. We're going to stop this problem now.
How does that one compare to the nuclear weapon?
It had, 11 KT, I think? I think they said 11 kilotons, conventional weapon.
That sounds high.
Yeah.
11 tons.
Yeah.
Sorry, 11 tons. So it's still small potatoes compared to it.
It had like a mile.
But if it hit us tonight, it would definitely give us a headache.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Do you think we learned lessons from North Korea and dealing with regimes, like uncooperative regimes and developing nuclear weapons?
So I speak with
Do you think we learned lessons from dealing with North Korea and uncooperative regimes with nuclear weapons? Like, should we be more proactive in the early stages of a regime acquiring nuclear weapons? Or
We've been active for 25 years. We've tried carrots and sticks. We've threatened them. We've had economic and energy negotiations with them. We've had some partial agreements with them. Nothing has worked. The U.S. has limited influence on a sovereign government, especially government run by just a handful of people. There's no public opinion. There's no Senate hearings on this in Pyongyang. So anyway, this can be related to your project in the sense this is such a potentially severe problem. And it's obviously a current problem that it could stimulate nuclear thinking in South Korea and Japan. Because the United States is not going to fool around with these guys and risk losing American cities to this mania. Anyway, so much for that. Let's go.